Hey, beautiful soul. You're listening to the Rising into Mindful Motherhood podcast, your weekly dose of fertility wisdom. I'm your host, Dr. Katie Wood. I'm a barefoot mama bear, pharmacist, and integrative fertility coach. This is your go-to podcast for all things to naturally nourish your fertility, embody womb healing, and reclaim your feminine power to accelerate your path to pregnancy. My expert guests and I will be having intentional conversations to discuss the many facets of a thriving, fertile foundation, natural wellness, and how we grow and transform as women on our journey to motherhood. So let's dive in, shall we? Hello and welcome to Rising into Mindful Motherhood. In this episode, I'll be talking with Dr. Mandy Patterson, an occupational therapist, certified holistic health coach, functional medicine practitioner, doctor of naturopathy, and mother of 6. She shows high-performing women and couples that they can have lasting, vibrant health. And using a lifetime of personal and professional experience, she bridges the division between conventional and alternative medicines, creating a simple, holistic health plan that shows women that achieving wellness can be invigorating and also fun. And in today's episode, we'll be discussing nutrition and genetics, also known as nutrigenomics, and the impact on fertility. So, welcome, Dr. Mandy. I'm super excited for our conversation today.
Thanks, Dr. Katie. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so for some of the listeners, this might be a new term for them. Could you explain what exactly is nutrigenomics?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I can talk a little bit more about my story here after I describe what nutrigenomics is. But the reason why I got into this field of study is because of my own health crisis back 23 years ago with my first son when I was pregnant. But nutrigenomics is basically the study of the impact of nutrition on our genes and our genetic DNA is fixed to an extent, but we have genetic SNPs or alterations in our DNA where we can use diet and lifestyle modifications to really improve our health. So I love speaking about this topic because it gives us so much power back as an individual to really go in and find out more about who we are from a unique bioindividuality side of things with labs and other genetic testing, and then put together a really great customized plan to help us. On the podcast today, we're talking about optimizing fertility outcomes. So,
Lovely. So share a little bit about your story. What you said your
yeah.
first pregnancy?
Yeah, so my oldest is 23 years old now, but back when I was pregnant with him, I was actually finishing my occupational therapy clinicals. I had initially studied to be an occupational therapist, and at 28 weeks, I suddenly developed severe preeclampsia, which for the listeners is pregnancy-induced hypertension, and I went into HELLP syndrome, which is kidney and liver failure.
Oh, mhm.
So when I walked into the ER, obviously for an assessment, they were like, you need to get your things in order. We don't think you're going to survive. Your baby is going to be very small. We don't know what his outcomes really look like. So that kind of set me on my path and journey to where I am today. Because back then, when I actually did come through by the grace of God, I have a really strong faith that on the other side of that was they were basically like, we don't know why you got so sick. And I was tested for so many different things like lupus and antiphospholipid syndrome that like predispose women to developing early onset preeclampsia. And I really didn't have any of those risk factors. And they said, most likely you're going to have, if you do go on to try to get pregnant again, many miscarriages. You could also have early preterm birth again. And so I was like, I don't want this to be my reality. I was always that type of person. I love kids. And I always envisioned that I would have a lot of kids. And so that's what started me down the path many years ago in figuring out all of these things that really go into our health and our level of fertility and what can we do about that, and we have so much power.
Yeah, wow. A powerful and amazing and scary story too. My friend had HELLP syndrome
Yeah.
and I can't remember exactly how far along she was when she had him, but he was super tiny and was in the
Yeah.
NICU for months. So did you end up having him at 28 weeks?
Yes, 28 weeks. I was so sick by the time they were looking at my blood levels and like looking at all of that. And the challenge with obviously women that go into preeclampsia is that they become eclamptic or go into a stroke or worse. And they felt that time was of the essence. So he was born and he weighed a pound and 14 ounces. So very small preemie and was on a ventilator for many months. We walked that line of he was born locally at a hospital here in Evansville, Indiana, but it was a level 3 and I really wanted him to be at a level 4, more of a research based institution. And he had some really significant setbacks that included necrotizing enterocolitis, which is
Mm,
basically where you have to feed these babies. They're so little, you have to give them nourishment, but you also risk that their GI tracts are too immature to basically receive the milk. And he ended up coding. And so we transferred him out to Indianapolis. So he was at Riley Hospital in Indianapolis for about 4 months. And I do feel like it was a blessing in hindsight because he did end up having to go through 2 bowel surgeries. So he ended up having strictures or scar tissue throughout his small and large intestine that required he needed surgical intervention. So
mhm,
yeah, so we walked that and he's continued even he's obviously an adult now, but has had to have some other surgeries because of that. And so that is why I'm just so deeply passionate about helping women optimize fertility because our level of health when we conceive will impact that baby for many years down the road and generations to come. And so,
mhm,
at the heart of it, from a genetic side of things, if we can look at nutrigenomics and genetics, we can really optimize not only our health, but that of our future generations that are coming.
mhm. Absolutely. And I'm very invested in your story now. So, what did you find? You obviously did some digging. Did you find anything about yourself that maybe made you more predisposed to having this?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, like the geek in me came out because I was like, okay, I need to look at family history on both sides. And interestingly enough, high high issues on my mom's side. Her dad, my grandfather, had a lot of cardiovascular issues. All of his siblings have passed away of stroke, heart attack, really real issues with that. And so, and then two, my grandmother had a history of cancer. And so back then, we didn't really know about genetic SNPs, but now I feel like the MTHFR, for instance, is one of those that all of us talk about. People, when they find that out, they're like, oh, this explains a lot of things. And so obviously, the MTHFR mutation is where we have issues. We can't process folic acid. And interestingly enough, for a lot of us women, that when we get pregnant or looking to get pregnant, the first recommendation is a prenatal, but it has folic acid in it. And for myself, some years down the road, did find out I was homozygous for the C667T variant. And so that's have much higher risk with clotting issues, cancer, cardiovascular issues, which is interesting because even for myself, once you develop severe preeclampsia like that, you have a much higher chance of down the road developing hypertension, like as
Mhm,
an adult. And so for me, that's one thing that I've had to work really hard at is keeping my blood pressure in check and making sure metabolically I'm healthy. And that's, for instance, one genetic SNP that can give a lot of us insight because it's upwards of 50 to 60% of European descent women have that.
mhm,
And so that can make a really big difference, and that impacts our ability to detox and get rid of toxins. And so we know that's a ubiquitous in our environment, and we're constantly being exposed. So
mhm. So you found the homozygous MTHFR. Did you find anything else?
yeah, yeah. Like, so we could go down all the rabbit holes of all of this. And and I've ran my genetics with several different companies and found out too that like I have much higher needs for vitamin D. That was like one thing that came up that for many women, maybe on your cast, understand is that in order to have good immune health, we have to have adequate vitamin D. And so mineral sufficiency is so important to have optimal vitamin D. And so for me, I have some SNPs that are associated with even magnesium, where I need higher amounts of magnesium as well, especially under stressful situations. So that was like another one that came up. And then two, like when we can dive into other inflammatory genes, that can help us obviously customize our plan. So for me, I'm always looking at omegas. That's one thing from a diet side of things, making sure I'm getting adequate amounts to really help with keeping inflammation levels down. Yeah, so that was some of the things that came up. And another really interesting one that I like to talk about because people will be like, oh, they might have that or maybe their partner has it is the snacking gene. So for some of my kids, it's interesting having all these children to see how they're wired and what their bio individuality is. But three of my kids really struggle. They're snackers and they're always snacking. And so some of us just don't have the feedback mechanism there to be like, oh, we need to stop eating because we don't feel full. We can keep eating and probably go through an entire box of, say, crackers or something and not feel that fullness. And when you have that dynamic, then you're like, okay, how can we shift this? Where, what can I do about this? And really work on quality, nutritious food, making sure we're getting adequate fiber in the diet so that we stay satiated. And that helps with blood sugar and all those things. But yeah, lots of interesting things with genes.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think for me at least, and probably the listeners, it helps to have a relatable story behind it instead of just talking about SNPs, right? I mean,
Yes.
because it can get confusing if you're not familiar with that for sure. So I have one more question about your story, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper into this. But so you found all this out after your first pregnancy. Obviously, you had five more children after that.
Yes.
Did you have any other occurrences of preeclampsia? Were they born full term? Were they early? Any other issues?
Yeah, so after my second one, I had no idea I would get pregnant as quickly as I did. And I was on the Micronor breastfeeding pill, mind you. I got pregnant with Sophia, and my oldest two are 21 months apart. So when I got pregnant, they were very concerned because they were like, I mean, for good reason, all the pregnancy complications I did have. But at that point, with that pregnancy, I was more cognizant of keeping my stress levels down. I had started making really significant dietary changes, which I always thought I ate healthy until I figured out I didn't eat healthy. Standard American diet, right? Like a sandwich with white bread for lunch, some Cheetos, like maybe an apple, and we think that's healthy eating, a soda, maybe two. And with that pregnancy, they immediately put me on baby aspirin, a low dosage of that. And around, I think it was around 16 weeks, they were like, we want you to be on modified bed rest, which actually was the worst advice for me. Because with that pregnancy, I gained more weight and I was always an athlete. So I was a runner and I did kickboxing and all these things. But what was funny with that is with that pregnancy, I was not very active because they were really wanting me to be on bed rest. And what happened was I gained more weight, a lot more weight than I did with my other pregnancies. So I gained like 37 pounds, which for me is a lot because I'm only like 5'2". With that pregnancy, I was good up until 37 weeks. And then I started having signs of the higher blood pressure, and they like really panicked and were like, we're taking her early by C-section. She was a healthy 37 weeker. She weighed 7 pounds. So healthy baby, took her home, didn't go through all the things that I went through. But it was that second and third pregnancy where I really was back to working out. I had really focused on my diet. So eating abundant fruits and vegetables, whole grains, like working on good quality protein with my meals. In that pregnancy, I only gained, I think, 13 pounds. And she was like, they had to pull her out, like, because she was like so comfy, cozy in there. And so after that, I had no more issues with high blood pressure. And so, what I think of really, even with the sedentary aspect of the second pregnancy, was movement is so important. Movement and exercise. And even for myself, I know, like, when we talk about the gene SNPs, like
Mhm.
the brain-derived neurotrophic factor related genetic SNPs, that is one of my key things. And so we know, even from a mental health side of things, that really working on movement is medicine for so many of us. And even for some of us, even more given our genetics.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was some interesting observations I made as I was going through the journey of the pregnancies and optimizing and all of those things.
Yeah. And I feel like it's just such a full circle, right? Just seeing the difference that nutrition and lifestyle and movement and all those things can have.
Yeah.
Like so drastic.
Yeah, so drastic. And even today, I will say this. So my mom has real issues with blood pressure, and she does a lot of functional medicine things, but she's on two medications and struggles with that. Like for me, I've been able to keep my blood pressure normal. I don't have any issues, but I am like, I work out probably 4 to 5 days a week, and I do weightlifting and weight training.
Hmm.
And so I really think for me, if I wasn't doing all of these things, like it would have already been suggested that I need to be on hypertensives and like all of those things. So,
Yeah,
but it gives you
absolutely.
light on how people get stuck in the system that like once they like have high cholesterol or high blood pressure, whatever underlying health dynamics there, then it's just suggested they go on a medication for the rest of their life versus
Hmm.
counseling them on our lifestyle foundations.
Believe me, I used to work retail pharmacy. I am fully
Yes,
aware
yes.
of the nonsense that goes on. Hence,
Yeah,
one reason why I don't do retail pharmacy anymore.
right.
Um,
Yeah.
it's wild, and yeah, it would just break my heart filling another statin or another diabetes medication, and just knowing that if these people have the right guidance, that they could really get off of these medications.
And I think so many of us, we don't, and you can speak to this so much, like we don't know the long-term ramifications of the cocktail of these different medications together. And we know the average American, by the time they're 40s, are on probably 4 or 5 different pharmaceuticals. And so this is like a perfect case in point of even my husband back in the day. So he struggled with really severe acne. And you'll probably know where I'm going with this, but they put him on Accutane.
Mhm.
And years down the road, now he's late 40s, he's got eye issues going on with his ducts. And the ophthalmologist that he consulted with said, "Were you on Accutane back in the day?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "Yes, these are some of the side effects that we're seeing where the glands of the eye are not producing enough oils. And so they get into eye issues."
Mhm.
So he's got to be on a special eye ointment that's out of Europe. And so, like, these things that we don't think about. And mind you, I do feel like from a functional medicine side of things, and you, I sure could agree with this, we have so many life-saving treatments and we excel in emergency medicine in the United States. But the challenge is for long-term treatment in preventative medicine, like we are so far behind the curve of so many
Absolutely.
countries.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. We need a lot of improvement there, but that is where passionate practitioners like yourself and myself come in hand, at least in this point in time, until the current medical system shifts, which
Yes.
can happen at any time now. But um,
Yes.
I think what I'd like to dive into now, after we've touched on lifestyle and nutrition, how can women, or how do you help women and or couples, if you work with both, use this genetic knowledge alongside lifestyle and nutrition to overcome, let's say, common fertility challenges like PCOS, endometriosis, and irregular
Yes.
cycles? What does that look like?
Yeah. So I think even with PCOS, so we do know it's a major cause of infertility in women. The probably the largest one. And like with PCOS, we know that it has roots in metabolic health. A lot of times with these women, we find that metabolically, from a blood sugar side of things, the processing of all of it goes awry somewhere. And they have some of these unique gene SNPs because we see this occur in families. So women that have sisters or mothers or even grandmothers had PCOS and maybe they weren't even diagnosed with that back in the day, but they still have maybe weight challenges and struggles, might be acne and some of those side effects that we see with women. I think from a genetic side of things, when we can go in and see these things, and I'm going to name a couple genetic SNPs that go over the head of everyone here, but there are certain ones that we're finding from a scientific perspective that are problematic. So Leper, it's LEPR is like one of them, and even the MC4R, those SNPs are involved in satiety. And we do find that women with PCOS, not all of them, because we have women that are heavier and some that are, they call it skinny PCOS, which I really don't like. It just like, you're like, it's an imbalance, right? But with women with the leper and the MC4R, they have higher body mass index, they have increased energy requirements, especially around fat intake. They have like more robust appetites. They struggle with the satiety side of things and just making good food choices, right? Because if you have these imbalances going on, if your body feels like it's starving and it's hungry, then you just are grabbing something right on the go because it's just really easy to fall into that trap. But when we know that, then we can say, what are some of the different supplements that we could use to help with this? And inositol is one, right? Helps with blood sugar regulation. Berberine's like another great herb, which you guys in the pharmaceutical industry use metformin, that is very similar to berberine as far as mechanism. But so I think that's like a great example of like when we know these things, I feel like as women, we can carry the shame of the weight of our health issues, and especially with struggling with infertility. And it's a lot. And so when we actually have evidence to say, this is why you are unique and you have these things, it just feels lighter. You know what I mean? Because even like with the blood pressure side of things for me, I was like, what did I do wrong? I felt such guilt with having to give birth so early. And I still struggle with that today because my son is still experiencing the side effects of an early preterm birth. And I think that can give us direction too, as far as diet, some of the lifestyle things we were talking about. Like for me, stress management is everything. It's like non-negotiable with my self-care. And I have to practice telling people no.
Hmm.
But when we know we're wired that way, then like we can do better. So
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. So I I totally agree with what you're saying. Just having that shame and that guilt, thinking that there's something wrong with you or that you did something wrong, where
yeah,
no, this is just like the blueprint of your body. You didn't do anything wrong, but hey, this is what we can do specifically for you and your situation to help improve this.
yeah. Yeah, so I feel like when we have the evidence, then like we can take action. And I think that's the beautiful thing about working with like us that are in the holistic industry, functional medicine providers. We seek to get to the root cause of what's going on. And we're looking at the person from a holistic lens, like whole body. And it's not just the physical, it's the mental and the emotional and the spiritual. In so many, I feel like we can truly change the landscape of fertility and our challenges, hormone challenges, if we look at it from that standpoint.
Absolutely. And what would you say if you're working with a fertility client, what are some of the most important genetic SNPs or markers that you like to look at?
Yeah, so for sure, like the MTHFR, I feel like for a lot of us is a go-to. We want to know what's going on because that makes a difference in how we're supplementing and those lifestyle recommendations. Like for me, I knew that was a huge factor as I reflect back on my journey, that it was the perfect storm. So I had the genetics, right? But our genetics don't determine our future and our outcome. There's other factors at play, right? And that looking at our environment and the things that we're putting on our bodies and in our bodies, the food and those things. But in my unique case, I think the perfect storm was I had genetic SNPs that were turned on, that I had a lot of inflammation going on, and it was stress related because I was literally working a 50-hour week and I was 6 months pregnant and I had just moved back to my hometown. I had a lot, it was overwhelming. I was so overwhelmed. And then what happened was I think my body was fighting off something because I was working around peds. And when you're exposed to a lot of peds and you haven't been in that environment, it can really, you can get sick. For me, in that case, it was like a big aha as I went back and reflected on. And when we actually look at other factors, some of us can have more inflammatory genes that can cause us to have more issues metabolically, and that can show up in our labs. Like hemoglobin A1C, when we talk about that's a marker of blood sugar levels over 3 months. If it's staying higher, the question is why? Is it the food and the diet? Is it stress? Is it not enough sleep? All those things. So we can take the genetic information and look at other tests, be it lab work, comprehensive stool testing. I do a lot of that in my practice, hair tissue mineral analysis, or organic acids, where we're looking at the biochemistry. But we can bring that all together and say, okay, got some inflammation going on because of this. And then these are some steps that we can take to really start to work on health and optimize.
Love it. Yeah. So it sounds like it's a really helpful thing. So this question is just coming through here. What would you recommend? Because obviously this is a fertility podcast. Most people are trying to get pregnant. Like, do you recommend anyone does this type of testing from the get-go? Or is it like if you've been trying for 6 months or maybe a couple of years, then maybe you should get the
Yeah.
testing? Like, what's your best recommendation for
So
someone?
here's my thing. Everybody comes into functional medicine for different reasons. And let's be honest, most people that come into our sphere, they've been struggling for a while. Like they're not getting their answers and they've been from one practitioner to another, right? So I feel like from the outset, genetics can make a really big difference. The challenge with genetics is to get a good quality test, you're going to actually invest. It's an investment in your health to get the information back. As I reflect on it and where I was at 23 years ago, I so wish I could have done that back in the day because it would have answered a lot of questions that I had. So I feel like, yes, I think you can definitely go into it with the testing. I don't think you can go wrong with it. I think it's going to give you more information on top of what you're already getting from a health history, what you're getting from other lab work and testing too. And so it can really help fast track things in creating like a protocol that is specific to your unique genetic needs.
Mhm.
For instance, and I'll talk about another SNP, and it's one that it's more well known, but it's the COMT, right?
Yeah.
And that SNP helps regulate metabolism, estrogen metabolism, and stress hormone clearance. And we know that these variants that women might have can lead to more estrogen dominance, increased anxiety and oxidative stress. And so when we know that information, that's the dynamic interplay of all these other SNPs that we've got going on, then we can be like, okay, so what do we need to do to upregulate estrogen clearance and getting that out of the system, but making the system more efficient? And so that could look like adding in more cruciferous vegetables, such as broccoli and cauliflower to support estrogen detoxification. And then also, like from the anxiety side of things, being more strategic with practicing mindfulness and maybe even yoga or prayer, whatever that looks like for the individual. Yeah, I feel like it's a science that we can use. It's not black or white, but it's a tool like all the other testing that we can do that can give us good insight into a strategic plan and moving forward. And especially for our ladies that have been struggling for a while to understand their own biochemistry and like their unique DNA.
Yeah, I think that anytime would be a good time to do this testing. I think it's common, kind of like you had mentioned in the beginning, there's probably not so much the urgency and the awareness to even know that you should or may need this type of testing, right? I feel like it
Yeah.
typically happens down the road when it's like, oh, something must be going on. Let's dig a
Yeah.
little bit deeper.
And I do want to say too, this genetic testing is not the testing you're going to go get done if you go to the IVF clinic. Like they're looking to rule out genetics that are going to be life threatening or life altering. Like, for instance, cystic fibrosis is one of those. That is a gene that we can't actually change that. So we're speaking specifically about genetic SNPs that are modifiable. We can make changes in our diet and lifestyle that are going to positively influence our health and our fertility outcomes.
Absolutely. And you have a freebie for the listeners called the Fertility Blueprint. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the fertility blueprint just gives a lot of information on just an overview of common issues that women are struggling with, as far as if it's blood sugar dysregulation or if it is a PCOS dynamic. A lot of women, and I'm sure you see this in your practice, deal with thyroid issues and autoimmunity. And it's helpful to have insight into these imbalances that are going on in the body, because then we can make changes in our daily life that are going to move us in the right direction. We have just a whole bunch of information on different ways that you can optimize your health. We honestly include the meal plan in there, fertility reboot meal plan, and just getting women like a roadmap to just get started, because I feel like there's just so much information being given to us all the time and out there on the internet, and just having some trusted sources you can go to get that information, I feel like makes the journey easier and not so overwhelming. And yeah, hopefully that will be a great resource for your listeners, Katie.
Absolutely. What a beautiful offer. And the link for that will be in the show notes. And I know you have a podcast,
Yeah.
Gutsy Fertility, if you want to just share what the gist of your podcast is about.
Yeah, so I do run the Gutsy Fertility podcast. It is born out of my own experience being like yourself, a conventional provider turned alternative holistic provider. So my many years of experience in working in the healthcare system and just helping people understand the history behind how our medical system is in the state that it is today. And I start with a lot of the history at the beginning of the podcast just so people understand. And then a lot of the interviews are with different practitioners and doctors and experts in the space that are working with people from a holistic lens and giving people practical tools on where to get started. And I love to just share like how my brain works from a functional side of things and all the things that I've learned along the way. So, yeah.
Awesome. Sounds great. So the link for that will be in the show notes as well. And let the listeners know where they can find you, connect with you, and learn more.
Yeah, you guys can find me on my website, which is www.mandypatterson.com. I'm out there on Facebook as Mandy Patterson, Functional Medicine Practitioner, and on Instagram as Dr. Mandy Patterson. And yeah, we're like all over. We have a blog as well on our website. We have lots of great resources depending upon what the struggles and challenges are. Lots of just great educational content. And everything I do is evidence based because my background was in research. And so, really think it's good to include that in when we're looking at a holistic plan with people.
Mhm. Amazing. All of that will be in the show notes. And thank you so much, Dr. Mandy, for sharing your beautiful story and your expertise and passion with us today.
Thanks, Dr. Katie. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Rising into Mindful Motherhood podcast. If this episode resonated with you or gave you an aha moment, stop what you're doing right now and write a review. This simple act of kindness helps me get this podcast out to connect with as many women as I possibly can. I also have a special offer. If you send me a screenshot of your review, I will take $250 off one of my premium coaching containers. Let me know what resonated with you the most and why. So connect with me in my free Facebook community or tag me on Instagram. You'll find both listed below. Thanks again from the bottom of my heart for tuning in to this episode, and I'll see you next time.